good vibrations.
Welcome to episode 144, and my guest today is Dave Murphy, also known as Allegedly Dave. Welcome along, Dave.
Hi there, how's it going?
All good, man, and keeping a bit busy yourself from what I hear?
Absolutely, it's non-stop here.
You've just been at the Harlequin Fair, I believe, doing some talks up there.
Oh, yeah, that's right. How did you know?
Well, you told me in an email.
Oh, did I? Okay.
Yeah, I've done that one. I was there last year and then a couple of years before that, doing a talk in one of the tents there. Absolutely sweltering heat when I was there.
Oh, right. Well, I was a bit lucky. It was quite cool. But I did two talks there. I did one about flat Earth and the other one about the language of creation.
Out in the wilds of Norfolk.
Yeah, it was very nice, actually.
What's with the Allegedly Dave handle then? Is that a reference to the maritime law type situation?
Yeah, it came about through that. How people call themselves, like Dave of the Murphy family or, commonly known as. I was being interviewed on a New Zealand podcast, and I've been interviewed 3 times, and every time I had a different name. So the guy said, who shall I call you this time? And he said, I'm going to call you Allegedly Dave. I thought, oh, okay, and it stuck.
Yeah, that's a good one. And your website states that you're just an ordinary bloke from Basildon and you underwent a midlife crisis, though I'm sure it was more of a red pill experience awakening in 2005. And I'm sure you've told the story many times, but do you just want to recap briefly on what that whole process was like and how it changed your life? Well,
it was a confluence of things, really, because it was around about 2004, 2005, for about 4 years after 9/11, and I was at 9/11, so I watched it from close range, and
that's right. You were present in New York that day.
That's right. In fact, if fate had not been on my side, I would have been in on the 40th floor of Tower 1, where I turned down a job in Lehman Brothers a month before.
Wow.
But yeah, I watched it, and I didn't really sort of think any more of it after that until about 4 years later, when I was helping my daughter with her physics homework, and I basically figured out that it couldn't happen the way they said it happened. And at the same time as I started to ask questions about that event, I was kind of getting to that point in my life. I was about 42, and I was thinking, what am I doing here? My job doesn't seem to be what I thought it was. Having all this money wasn't all what I thought it was. Nothing was what I thought it was, and so I started pulling at all the different threads of my life, and everything just unraveled. My job was not what I thought it was. I was actually putting people out of work and, enslaving people to a computer, essentially. My marriage wasn't what I thought it was. So there was a moment that I remember very well where the whole thing became very clear. I bought myself a Ferrari. And, I was enjoying myself for a few months bombing around in it. But then there was one day I'd stopped at some traffic lights, and there were people crossing the road in front of me, and they stopped on the other side of the road, and they were looking at the car. And I looked at them and I thought, hang on a minute, I'm in a car. And from where I'm sitting, I can't tell I'm in a Ferrari. All I'm seeing is some dashboards and the steering wheel, and I'm just in a car. I thought, did I buy this car for me or for them? And I had to really sort of, do a bit of soul searching. I realised I bought it for everybody else to see me in it. And then I looked at my big house, and I thought, this huge house that 4 of us are rattling around in, did I buy it for us? Or did I buy it for everybody else to see how well we're doing?
For the status.
And so, yes. Yeah, and it became obvious that I'd been living this lie. So everything I looked at just started to fall apart. And it deconstructed my life. And I knew I had to change it. And, a year or a few years later, I had a completely different life. No longer married. I moved back to England. I left all the money behind, and now I travel around helping people for free.
Well, that's a pretty unique story, brother.
Well, I'd hope it wasn't so unique. I hope other people are having a similar sort of change in their lives.
Well, a few are that I've spoken to, certainly, but it's still quite a rare situation for people to find themselves in. But it happens for a reason, I firmly believe that these aspects of our lives are pre-planned by our higher selves before we get here, and we're just kind of aligning ourselves with the path that we were always meant to be on. And everybody's details are slightly different, but the overall meaning behind it is pre-prepared for us. That's how I feel about it. It takes some of us longer to get there than others. I didn't wake up at the time of 9/11. It took me until about 2010. But we all get there, at different stages and through different circumstances. And it's always fascinating to hear people's accounts. I know you've probably told the story many times, so thank you for going over it again.
Well, there was a time when I believed the same thing as you do right now, when I was in the New Age type phase of my life. But I have a different interpretation now. There was no as far as I'm concerned, there's no contract before we started here. We're in the middle of a game, and this is what the Old Testament basically says. We're in the middle of a game, and it's a contest, and essentially against yourself, really. And it's like an open-ended question. You're incarnated down here without memory of who or what you are, and the game is, how are you going to play this game? Here's your circumstances. Are you going to play this game wickedly or righteously? And off you go.
Are you of the view that we incarnate here without consenting to it?
I don't think our consent actually comes into it.
We're sent here by the Creator, effectively, and just left to make the best of it?
Incarnated by the Creator. It's not left to make the best of it. Again, there's a book that was taken out of the Old Testament called Second Esdras, which is the fourth book of Ezra. And it was taken out for a very good reason, because it literally tells you why we're here, the whole purpose of life, and what happens after we die. So they took it out because it destroys the entire Christian, doctrine.
Sounds like a pretty useful book.
It's a very useful book, especially some of the later chapters where it prophesies. Well, it actually prophesies the empire of the three cities. There's three places on earth that are unlike any other place. They're not part of the city that they're a part of.
Oh, we're talking City of London, Washington, D.C. and Vatican City.
Exactly. That's the empire of the three cities.
Yeah, I know about those, yeah.
They're owned by the same bloodlines, and that bloodline is symbolized by the eagle. Okay, they have that eagle symbolism. Okay, the UK is slightly different. Their symbolism is the eagle mixed with the lion to form the griffin. Okay, and that's a story in itself. But this bloodline has this symbol of the eagle, and in Second Esdras it tells of in the last days the earth will be overspread by a three-headed eagle. Okay, and the three heads, the middle head is going to be the strongest of them all, and that is obviously America, which is the military arm of this empire. Mm-hmm. So it basically tells the story of what's going to happen at the end. So,
and London is the financial aspect, and Vatican City is the spiritual aspect, right?
Absolutely, and between those three cities, this bloodline controls every man, woman and child on earth, one way or the other. Okay,
well, I'm sure we're going to touch on some more aspects of that as we go forward. There's two main subjects I wanted to talk to you about today, and they're both topics that I've heard you delivering public talks about. So we met at Truth Juice in Birmingham. What would that be, a couple of years ago now? You did the talk?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was about 2 years ago.
Yeah, so you were doing a talk there based on the book that you just put out called Black Man, Do You Know Who You Are? And then more recently, you did a talk for New Horizons, which I've been to many times. This one was on the language of creation, so I do want to touch on that as we progress. But probably the best way to get into the first subject is to just read the little bit of blurb about your book, taken from your website, about this book. As a so-called African-American or Afro-Caribbean, have you ever wondered why you have no history before the transatlantic slave trade? Why do you have no homeland you can point to or language of your own? Why is it that you and those who look like you inhabit the lowest social strata all across the world? I guess that's a pretty good intro to this whole subject area. So maybe you just want to tell us how you came across this area of research and what sparked your interest in it and what surprising elements you came across as you delved into it.
Well, it's a bit difficult to actually say exactly how I got into it, because when you delve into the truth, you find it's like many different rabbit warrens leading off from the place that you're at.
I know that one, yeah.
Yeah, so while I was looking at the flat Earth, I made my first flat Earth video, and I called it "The Biggest Lie of All." But while I was completing that video, I found there was an even bigger lie underneath it, and that was who we are. So I was concentrating on where we are, but the question of who we actually are was an even bigger lie.
Lies and layers.
Yes, and that has been my 15-year journey so far. It's you find out a truth and you think, wow, I just figured out what's really going on here, and then you get further into it and you find there's another layer underneath that, and then another layer underneath that, and each time it gets darker and darker, And actually, just jumping across to something else, on my website, I've got a thing called the Muggle test. So it just presents you with 10 random questions. And depending on how you answer, it tells me which level you've got down to on that subject.
Okay.
So
how many rabbit holes you've fallen down?
Yes, exactly. Because, you get presented with a multiple choice of four answers. And each answer is at one of the levels. So, I can basically work out how far you've gone down just by finding out your answer. Anyway, but I was just getting the point that there's so many different levels to each truth. And so, I was looking at the flat Earth, and somebody told me, the Bible is a flat Earth book, don't you? And I was like, is it? So I started looking at it, and they showed me some of the verses. I was like, oh, yeah, so it is. That's interesting. And I've been previously pointed to it, that book, and a couple of other subjects. And so this was the third time. So usually when I see something three times, it warrants a bit further investigation. So I decided to read the book for the first time in my life. Yeah, I'd never had any religious training, no sort of pastors or priests or anything.
Would you say you were an atheist before that?
Absolute rabid atheist.
Okay.
So I read the book 3 times through, and it dawned on me that the Old Testament, there was a lot more to the Old Testament than I thought. The New Testament was rubbish. It was obviously not part of it, and it was just tacked on the end, and that became obvious to me. But from that, I decided to actually research the Old Testament, and that's what led me into finding out that that my own heritage actually stretched back to the Israelites of the Old Testament. So that's how I got into it.
Well, I'm someone that's been listening closely to hip-hop lyrics for the past 30 plus years, and there was a phase in the late 80s, early 90s where you'd hear constant references from rappers to the black man being the original inhabitant of Earth and of all other races being descended from Africans. And I think straight away of the Public Enemy album called In Fear of a Black Planet, which sums it all up. So it's an idea that's been out there, but it's just not one that anyone who doesn't listen to rap music or study such matters from an academic scholarly point of view is likely to have come across. This is not one that tends to make the history books and the school textbooks, or indeed the Discovery Channel, is it?
No, it's not. But even that is, again, one of the layers that is a truth, but it's not the whole truth. If you actually start researching the Old Testament, you find it's a literal book of history. Okay. The supernatural events detailed in that book actually happened. So, they found Noah's Ark back in 1980. They found the Red Sea crossing. And, it's undeniable that those events actually happened. So if those events did actually happen, then mankind was reduced to 8 people. Okay. And those 8 people were dark-skinned people. That's it. So out of Africa, well, not really, because the land that they say they're calling the Middle East, well, it is technically Northeast Africa. It's only when they cut the Suez Canal that they separated that part from the rest of Africa. But it is still Northeast Africa. But yes, so mankind descended to eight black people. So yeah, you can't really get away from that if you actually believe the story, and there's no reason not to believe that story.
Just refresh my memory on what you were talking about at the Truth Juice Birmingham event, where I think you were saying up until fairly recent history, you had most of humanity being what we would call black people, and it's only in fairly recent generations that other what we call races have descended from those original people. I may have got that slightly wrong, but just I think the gist of it is probably correct. Just refresh my memory on the points that you were making there.
Well, I can't actually remember the points I was making back then, but yes, you
were talking about fairly recent points in history, anyway.
Right. Well, okay, fairly recent. Well, most of Europe. There's a period of European history that is referred to as the Dark Ages. Okay, it was actually the time when it was Europe was dominated by black people, and the I guess what you'd call the white people were actually banished to the mountains of Georgia, the Caucasus Mountains. So the period that was called the Dark Ages was 1,000 years of black rule in Europe. Okay, it was only in around about 1450 to 1492, around that time, was a period of Renaissance, which is the rebirth of white domination of Europe. From about 1492 onwards was essentially the genocide or the mass relocation of black people from Europe. So I've got a quote from Benjamin Franklin, who basically lays out that he basically says outright that Germany was black, Sweden was black, Russia was black. The only places in Europe, or the only places in the world where white people were in Saxony, Germany, in England, and in the colonies in America. Okay. And he just said the rest of the world is black and brown. And obviously he uses other phraseology, uses the word swarthy. Now, a lot of people look at that word and go, oh, that just means kind of, slightly brown. But if you actually look at the word, it's actually the Anglo-Saxon word for black, as in dark black, the colour. The word black isn't a colour, isn't a colour in... Sorry, it isn't a colour. The word black is actually in Anglo-Saxon is the word for white. Yeah, it's because if you think about it, it's the root of words like blanch, bleak, bleach, and in French it's blanc, which is white, and
White,
blanco, which is white in Spanish, and bianca. Is it Bianca?
Bianco.
I think it's Bianca in Italian. So black is white, actually, and it gets
just speaks to this inverted, crazy world in which we live, doesn't it? Where everything's back to front.
Exactly. So yes, the idea of race was invented in the 1700s. Okay, before that it was about bloodline, and this idea of race is there to get people fighting each other and not realizing who you're connected to, so you end up fighting them as well.
Right.
So that the real people with the pure bloodline, who only care about themselves, can carry on, doing what they do, without fear of being sort of stopped by the rest of us.
It's all about the bloodlines, always is.
Yes, always has been.
And you were talking about the fact that obviously we now have a Europe and vast parts of the rest of the world which is dominated by white people or Caucasians. You were talking about how these people were banished to the Caucasus Mountains, which is where we get the term Caucasians from when we're referring to white people. And, we don't really think about where this term comes from, but it's used all the time. And the reason we've got so many what we think of as Caucasians is because of a deliberate program of breeding to breed out the black traits in people. It's a form of eugenics which took place, right? And it was all a specific, deliberate thing.
Yes, it is. And again, when I'm talking about white people, again, I'm talking about the bloodline, and not talking about specific people as such, but this bloodline that a lot of people who identify themselves as white are not part of this bloodline. Yeah, they. Did you ever watch Harry Potter?
I've caught bits and pieces when my kids have had it on.
Okay, well, you may or may not know this, but there's a family in that film called the Malfoys. Okay.
Oh yeah, they're like albinos, right?
Yeah, blonde hair, blue eyed,
Yeah.
Aryan types. And they have this kind of these airs and graces, and they consider themselves superior to everybody, and they refer to Harry Potter and anyone like him as mudbloods. Yeah, dirty blood, not pure bloodline, and that's what I'm trying to say. There's these people who have tried to keep their bloodline pure. And there's a reason for that as well. And they consider anybody who's not of their bloodline, even if they look, vaguely similar to them, they consider those people as inferior, dirty blood, not pure-blooded people.
Mudbloods, there it is, they're thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my work into the music industry and the entertainment industry generally, and where all these people come from that get elevated to celebrity status, covers bloodlines, and it goes back into ancestry and genealogy and how you get different generations of the same family inserted into popular culture and influential positions in society. So you might have a family where in one generation you had a Lord Mayor or a governor, and then in the next generation it will be a prominent politician or a prominent business leader or banker, and the next generation it will be a famous Hollywood actor or singer. Either way, it's the same families going back into antiquity, and new generations of these families are given these important influential roles because they don't just want these roles to go to any random members of society. They want to literally keep it in the family. So my work has exposed a lot of that, and it seems there's a lot of crossover here with what you're stating.
Yes, because look at Hitler, for instance. He wasn't just some random bloke who decided to take over Germany.
Yeah.
He was part of the Rothschild family. A mudblood part of the Rothschild family. The Baron Rothschild basically got his maid Maria Anna Schicklgruber pregnant, and when she started to show, she got fired. and her baby was Hitler's grandfather.
Yep.
So they use part of their bloodline, the disposable part of the bloodline, to be, I guess, the fall guys, to be the ones to do some of the dirty work and be the fall guys.
Well, that's right. I hear the same thing about Peter Sellers. According to the New Zealand researcher Greg Hallett, he states that Peter Sellers was an illegitimate offspring of the royal family. I mean, he's got this whole alternative bloodline where he claims nobody in the so-called British royal family is who you think they are in terms of who their parents were. But in this complicated alternative family tree that he's got, Peter Sellers pops up and he says, he was an illegitimate so-called royal, and rather than let him go to waste, they inserted him into culture as this actor and comedian, and they had him pushing agendas and just influencing society. So it wouldn't surprise me if that turned out to be the case, because this is the modus operandi of these so-called elites. They just put their own into these prominent positions all the time, and they've been doing it forever.
Exactly. And when you realise what they're doing and how they're doing it, when you see these news stories come out, it's obvious what's going on. Every single person in the public eye who is capable of having influence over others is either part of this bloodline or has pledged their allegiance to this bloodline through secret societies. That's right. It. Every single one of them. And every single one of them has done this vile, disgusting shit. The stuff that, normal humans would not dream of even imagining. These people have done it. And, some of their fall guys are being exposed, but it's every one of them. Every single one of them on TV, even the nicest person you can think of on that box. Yeah, he's done it as well.
It makes Eyes Wide Shut look like a Boy Scouts picnic.
Exactly.
From what I hear about these parties anyway.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Eyes Wide Shut. I mean, you really think they'd show the whole truth on television or in a film,
Well, it's not my idea of a party, mate. No,
but, the film didn't go anywhere near what the reality is, yeah? They wouldn't dare show it.
Yeah.
This world, we think of this world as a civilized, cultured place, but all the abominations of the past are still going on today, just undercover.
Well, look at all this shit that's coming out about Prince Andrew attending these Jeffrey Epstein parties and being involved with underage girls and stuff, and that really is only the tip of the iceberg. Just the fact that this is being reported in the mainstream media means it goes a hell of a lot deeper than that. But even the scant details that we're getting about that indicates that the royal family is far from what many people would prefer to think of it as, beyond reproach and completely moral. They're anything but. And like I say, these are just very slight revelations that we're getting about Andrew. Who knows how deep the truth really goes?
Right. Well, we're in a time that's known as the apocalypse, which isn't, what everybody seems to think is, the destruction of everything. It's the great revealing of truth. So, I'm sure that, Andrew would have preferred this information not come out in the mainstream.
Sure he would.
But you know what? It's come out, against their will. So this is part of it. This is part of the Great Awakening, part of the Great Apocalypse, that the truth can never be hidden forever. It's got to surface at some point.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
It's like holding a balloon underwater. Eventually it's coming up.
I mean, the research areas I'm involved with include looking back at the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and these groups that came out of the counterculture in the 1960s. And there's so many revelations now coming out about the Beatles and the true nature of them and what they were really all about, and the symbolism and the occult ties that they had to these different secret societies and stuff like that. And here we are 50 odd years later, and this information is just coming to light. It's remained hidden for all those decades, but it's coming out. And as you say, it always does. Sometimes it takes decades, sometimes it takes centuries, but the truth always rises to the top in the end.
Well, again, this is where the Old Testament comes in. It says that we're definitely in the last days, and in the last days, knowledge will increase, and people are going to start to find out what's going on, and that leads to a great awakening of people, in these last days. And that's what's happening, is there are people waking up to and realizing who they are, whether it's good or bad, all around us, and we're seeing that the empire that, the Roman Empire that's overspread the whole earth is starting to collapse around our ears.
And at the same time, you've got all these challenges that are being thrown at us. The onslaught of 5G and the Internet of Things and all these different assaults on human health. So at the same time as there's an opportunity to uncover great truth and come across knowledge that's been hidden from previous generations, you also have to battle all these different ways in which we're being enslaved and controlled. So it's certainly interesting times to be alive, whichever way you cut it.
Well, you know what? Some of the thing about this bloodline is when you look into it, you find that this bloodline was given two blessings. The first one was deception. They were cunning hunters. Yeah, so they're good at deception. And the second one was violence and warfare, to live by the sword. And this is what this bloodline has done for the last 500 years. So a lot of the things that they've used to keep us in fear are illusions. So, for example, one of the biggest illusions I believe they've perpetrated on us has kept the world in fear for generations, and that's nuclear weapons. They literally don't exist. They're made up. That was a revelation that came to me when a friend of mine, we were on a Skype call, and a friend of mine from America basically came back after a 2-week holiday in Hiroshima. And we were like, what? You've been in Hiroshima? Yeah. I thought that was a nuclear wasteland, And he said, no, it's a beautiful city. Nobody's got radiation sickness. There's no radiation in the air or anything. It's just a wonderful, thriving city. So once you start looking into it, you find that, some of these nuclear events didn't actually happen the way they said it happened. And the idea of nuclear weapons is bullshit.
Well, so I've heard, yeah. I think they're opening a Butlins at Chernobyl next. That'd be a nice place to go on holiday.
Well, actually it is, because, all the wildlife has returned to Chernobyl, Although there's an almost extinct type of wolf that is now thriving there because there's no humans there. That's the only thing that's changed. There's no humans there, apart from a whole load of old women who decided not to move out the hot zone, and they've been thriving there
and are doing
ever
just
since
fine.
It happened. Yes, but there's been some propaganda actually come out that I found out just recently. Some American TV series that has been trying to kind of spin that whole idea that they weren't actually in the hot zone, and they don't spend much time there and all this stuff. But no, it's rubbish. It's a spin.
Yeah, I've certainly heard the suggestion that nuclear weapons don't exist the way we're told they do. And really, when you look at the raving, mentally ill psychopaths that we've got running this world, if these things really did exist, I think it's a fairly safe bet that all these decades in, by now, they would have blown the bloody place up. Looking at their true nature, they would not have been able to resist using these things if they really did exist.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many countries that hate America, and how is it that America's the only one that's exploded 2 of these things, and in anger
70 years ago?
Yeah, no, you're right. It would have happened many times, And if you look, I think there's a resource online where you can see how many nuclear tests there have been around the world over the years. And if you look at it, it's frightening. We should all be irradiated to the teeth right now if that graphic was correct. There's no way any of us should be alive right now if it was real.
It's a genius way to keep people perpetually afraid. It's the same thing as the fear of being hit by an asteroid or a comet that we get.
Yeah.
Every now and again they wheel out Brian Cox or bloody David Attenborough or somebody, and they'll say, we came within a whisker of being hit by a meteor last month and it could happen any time. It's just a brilliant way of keeping people in a constant state of fear and paranoia.
The nuclear one was amazing. It's brilliant. It had people cowering under desks for years,
Yeah. I remember in the 80s there was so much paranoia about the Cold War when Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Two Tribes came out, and all the scenarios that record was outlining. It had people terrified of a non-existent threat.
Yes, there was that. There was some cartoon. It was a film, but animated film. Day After, yes, with the two old people, and that terrified people, didn't it?
It really did, yeah.
So deception, as I said, deception.
Absolutely. Just going back to the basis of your book then that we were discussing, it's long seemed to me that the control system that we have has nothing but contempt for regular members of society. As we said, when it comes to the so-called bloodline elites, they see themselves as being an entirely different class to everyone else, and they see us as just, useless eaters, vermin, just to be exterminated and enslaved. But it has seemed to me that they reserve a particular breed of contempt towards black people, and we can see this having played out in many ways. You can think of the inner city ghettos of the United States, where they were flooded with the epidemic of crack cocaine at the hands of the CIA, by the way, it comes down to, and then AIDS and the prison industrial complex, where young black men are just being incarcerated as quickly as possible to make huge profits for these industries, and so many other ways in which black people, particularly black communities, have been targeted for a specific breed of, enslavement and exploitation. So I wonder if this speaks to what you were addressing earlier on, where there's this hidden knowledge of where humanity has come from, and that breeds this particular type of contempt, and explains why the control system is so keen to put down black people as far as possible.
Right. Yes. Well, growing up, I always wondered why do people hate black people so much? What have we done? But it turns out that, again, this goes back to the Old Testament. It's a war between two brothers. You go back to the story of Jacob and Esau in the Bible. Now, Esau was the firstborn of Isaac, and typically the firstborn inherits everything. But before they were born, before these twins were born, the Most High already said that it would be Jacob that would inherit everything. So Esau was born first. He expected to inherit everything. Jacob basically buys Esau's birthright from Esau when he was, he came home hungry. I found out it wasn't that he came home hungry after hunting. It turns out when you look into some other books, Esau was the one who killed Nimrod, and he killed him, cut off his head, took the garments that were off him, and got chased by Nimrod's men. So he thought he was going to die. So he gave up his birthright. And when Isaac, their father, was dying, their mother basically helped Jacob trick Isaac into giving Jacob the blessing. And that blessing was to inherit the earth, essentially. Now, people say, oh yeah, it doesn't really count because he was Isaac was tricked, but it doesn't matter because Esau had already given the birthright over to Jacob anyway. But so the dynamic was set up back then that the descendants of Esau hate with a passion the descendants of Jacob. Now, there's something else about this bloodline that I haven't gone into, and you were talking about how this bloodline looks at other humans as inferior.
Yeah.
Well, the reason is because it isn't that there are other humans. These elites are essentially a different species. There was an event back in Genesis 6:4. There's only a couple of lines in the Old Testament, but the book of Enoch, one of the books that was taken out, it goes into much more detail about. And it was the incursion of a celestial class of being, a type of angel called a watcher, coming down to earth and having sex with women and having an offspring that were very, very different to humans. One set of these offspring became giants, and they were the giants of antiquity. You know, giants did exist, and we still see evidence of these giants today. But that bloodline continued on to this day, and it's this one family, essentially, because they only marry within their own bloodline, and we call them the royal families, the elites, and they derive their so-called right to rule because they say they have the blood of the gods. Yeah, and what they mean is the angels that were worshipped as gods, and we know who they are. You know, we know their names. You know, they've had all different names throughout all these different cultures, but they're the same characters. You know, Zeus, Apollo, you know, Vishnu.
It's the idea of the divine right of kings, where all that comes from.
Yes, there is a real royal bloodline, and that was the one that was ordained by the Most High himself. You know, the one that descended through King David. But there is the basically the doppelganger bloodline. You know, the bloodline of the adversary. You know, equal but opposite, and that's this fallen angel bloodline. And right now, the fallen angel bloodline is in control.
Has been for a long time.
Yes, for the last 500 years. As
Not
I said,
longer.
it's again, it's if you look through history, you get this period of 1,000 years where their control was broken. So before that, they had some control, and you can again read the whole story of the Old Testament, and you can see this struggle between these two bloodlines. But this bloodline established itself with the Roman Empire, because this bloodline were the Greeks and the Romans. The fall of the Roman Empire ushered in 1,000 years of black rule in Europe. But these people came back, around about 1492, and ushered in the new Roman Empire, which is what we're under today. Yeah, so the Roman Empire almost controls almost everything on Earth at the moment. In fact, there's not too many places that aren't controlled by the Roman Empire. I think one of them is, I don't know if you heard of that news story, the Sentinelese Islands.
No, don't know those.
You might have heard the story where the missionary decided to break the law, essentially, and try and contact these people and bring JC to them. And they answered him with a couple of arrows in the back.
Yeah, I must have missed that one.
Okay, no. So there's an island where this tribe has remained uncontacted, and these people live a really idyllic life in the Indian Ocean.
No 5G there, then?
No 5G. You know, they've got abundance of food. They're quite happy. You know, the people from helicopters can see them, you know, just playing on the beach and stuff. And they've said in no uncertain terms, leave us alone. And they're very, very right to do that, because there's another island close by them, the Andaman Islands, where another uncontacted tribe got contacted. They're called the Jawara tribe. And these people decided to welcome the strangers. And now that their culture has been destroyed, utterly destroyed. You know, the islands have been turned into a tourist trap. And
McDonald's and Starbucks everywhere.
Well, worse than that. Kind of rich Americans go over there with drugs and alcohol, and to entice the local girls out into the forest to rape them. So their culture has been utterly decimated, just because they made the mistake of welcoming the West into their lives.
Yeah. But that first island that you outlined there, it's kind of refreshing to know that there are still places on the face of this earth that are untouched by so-called Western civilization.
Well, it's not likely to last that much longer, because, you know, I was kind of thinking that this event was almost, I'm not sure if it was even a false flag, as a pretext to start actually, you know, throwing their weight around on this island, because this Roman Empire does not want anything, not even a blade of grass, to be free. It wants to control the whole earth. So it's only a matter of time before they move in on that island too.
Yeah. When it comes to looking at aspects of history anew, there's been this trend recently towards the subject of Tartaria, this, you know, lost empire that's been scrubbed from the history books, and the idea of this mud flood that swept across Europe. Are those subjects you've looked into at all?
Yes, briefly, but, you know, I don't go there, because it comes on the heels of this the whole, you know, giant petrified trees business. You know,
well, some people lump those things in together. A lot of things get thrown in the same basket, I suppose.
Right, and what that did basically is had whole loads of people hunting and feverishly for giant stone trees for years at a time, and then it just fizzles out, because, okay, what if that's true? Then what? Well, nothing. It's just like gee whiz, you know, there were some trees that were really big. So what? You know?
Just another lie to add to all the others.
Yeah, but what it has accomplished is getting sort of, you know, good researchers out there spinning their wheels looking for giant petrified phantoms, you know, and to be honest, I see, you know, the mud flood thing, you know, exactly the same way. You know what? When I spoke to somebody about it, I asked a couple of questions. I said, so was this a worldwide mud flood? And they said yes. I said, okay, where did all the mud come from? And they couldn't answer me, because think about it. If there was a mud flood simultaneously in England and America, there must have been mud covering the whole of the Atlantic Ocean. Where did that mud come from? There's only, you know, if you look at the Earth, there's only a very thin skim of Earth on Earth, you know, covering the rock.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where did all that mud come from? If anything, the only mud flood was the flood, and that actually opens up a very interesting idea. If you imagine that, you know, prior to the flood, there was a you know, possibly a worldwide civilization. There may have been, well, not a worldwide, at least throughout Europe and you know, the Near East and all that stuff. This whole civilization got wiped out in the flood. Well, when there was a flood, right, all of a sudden, very suddenly, there'd be a lot of silt that you know, gets spread across the entire sort of new ocean floor. So what if the architecture, or a lot of the architecture that we consider as fairly modern, you know, at least Victorian perhaps, what if that was actually pre-flood architecture? Now that to me might make sense, but again, it's like gee whiz information that doesn't take you anywhere.
Right. Okay. Just before we move on to the next subject then, when we spoke after your Birmingham talk, I mentioned a couple of records to you which addressed many of the subjects that you'd brought up in your Birmingham talk. There was Gary Bird and the GB Experience, The Crown, from 1983. It's a 10-minute record. It hit the charts in that year. It's one of my all-time favourite records, actually. Mind-blowing lyrical content from Gary Bird, talking about the accomplishments of black Africans through the ages in civilization, and Raskas Nature of the Threat, which is a very hardcore militant rap record which will not be to everybody's tastes. Did you ever get to listen to those two?
One of them I couldn't find, and the first one, the 10-minute one, I did listen to, but that was a long time ago. I can't remember
Sure.
too much about it, to be honest.
All right. Well, I'm going to put links to both those records in the show notes. People might want to, if you're feeling adventurous and you want to really wrap your mind around all of this, then take a listen to the lyrics of those two records. They will blow your mind. All right, then. So the other subject I wanted to talk to you about was the language of creation, which you presented at New Horizons. Mm-hmm. And this put me in mind of something that somebody said to me many years ago when I'd first woke up, in inverted commas. I was having a conversation with this young guy, and he said to me, we're never going to be truly free until we stop speaking the English language. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, because we're enslaved by the very language that we speak and the very words, because the words are not what we think they are. They don't mean what we think they do. And energetically, in terms of the frequencies that we're emitting when we speak this language, we're, just remaining in this low vibrational negative existence. And we've got to shake ourselves free from this language. And those comments stayed with me, and years later I can still recall him saying those things, and it put me in mind with a lot of the content of your presentation there. So maybe you want to just give us an overview of what your main points were on this one.
Right, my main points were essentially that there is an initial language of mankind, an original language of mankind. And it doesn't work in the way that, say, these Western languages work, like English and Greek and Latin and whatever. Okay, the original language was a language of pictures and elementary sounds, and it works in a completely different way. In as much as languages like English and German and French and whatever. They get processed in the left-hand side of your brain. And it's a kind of serial, step-by-step, pattern-matching, recognition, type of process that has to happen whenever you listen to a language. And you can never get an exact understanding of what somebody is saying because the language is not exact. Whereas the original language of mankind is this language of pictures, which is actually concrete in the opposite way to our languages, which are abstract. And I'd have to get into detail about how that works, but Paleo-Hebrew, which is the original language of mankind, is concrete in a way that if the actual words actually give you the entire experience of the meaning of the word, rather than in English we just get a kind of conceptual label on things, which doesn't give you an experience. It just gives you a representation of the thing. So it's very hard to say these things in English because our language doesn't actually cut it. But when you get how Paleo-Hebrew works, right, you can see it's huge and wide and expansive. Just one word is this huge kaleidoscope of information and feeling and nuance that you just can't get from one of these Western, abstract, symbolic languages. So shall I give you the example, the standard example I give people?
Sure.
Okay, the standard example is I would ask somebody to guess the film. If I'm going to describe the film first in English and then in Paleo-Hebrew. Okay, so in English, and I'll do it on you. English is a man on the autistic spectrum recounts his life to strangers. What's the film?
It's Forrest Gump.
Right, you've heard this before, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I have. Yeah, I'm at an advantage on this one.
Yeah. So what happened there was when I was saying the words, in the left-hand side of your brain, you were hearing the sounds I was making. You were fetching the meanings of those sounds, and then comparing those meanings to a list of films that you'd seen. Okay. And well, you had the advantage, but some people say Forrest Gump, other people say Rain Man, others say Beautiful Mind, and there's a couple of other films that have come up. Yeah. But as I said, it's not an exact thing. There's guesswork there. In trying to interpret those words. Okay, so in Paleo-Hebrew, and as I said, it's a language of pictures. I'll just present you with a set of like emojis, set of pictures. So the picture would be man running, a few trees, a box of chocolates, could even be a park bench, a shrimp, and a boat. So when I go through those pictures, at some point, as I go through those pictures, people will just go, I know what it is. Okay. Yeah. Which is different from the process when they were listening to the words, because they're listening to the words and they were guessing what it could be. Right? There's just this guess, and they think, well, there's a good chance it's like this one, but it could be this or that. But when I go through those pictures, all of a sudden there is a knowing. It's Forrest Gump, okay? And it's not like, as I'm presenting you the pictures, you're not actually thinking about the pictures. You're not processing those pictures. It's not happening in the left-hand side of your brain. Yeah, you're taking all those pictures at once, and all of a sudden the information comes to you, the knowing comes to you, and that is the original language. Even in our language, we have a phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and in that way, it really is. One picture. Well, I wouldn't say one picture, maybe two pictures at least. Convey a myriad of things when you put those two pictures together.
Well, that statement gets taken further. You hear it said that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a symbol is worth 1,000 pictures, talking to the language of symbolism. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Because obviously a symbol is an amalgam of pictures. So yes, it's a language we don't know much about at all. And it's a language that the elite absolutely do know, and they're using against us all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Looking at some of the other books that aren't in the Old Testament, it tells you how Nimrod became the ruler of the earth. One of these books says that he was given a secret combination of words. And that's what made him great. Okay. Now, bearing in mind that the earth was speaking one language, and that language was Paleo-Hebrew, right? And it's already been established in the book of Jasher or Jubilees, I think it's Jubilees, that Paleo-Hebrew was the language of creation, the language that the Most High communicated with Adam with. So everyone was speaking this one language. Nimrod was given a secret combination of words, and that made him great. And what he did with that greatness was try and build a tower to go and war against the Most High. So that's why the language was taken away from us, because we weren't ready for it as such. We couldn't be responsible with it.
This is the Tower of Babel story, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that related to Babel?
Yes, that's where Babylon came from.
Right.
Yeah, it's that same area. And the way that the languages spread out from Paleo-Hebrew mirrors the way that people spread out from the Tower of Babel incident. You can see the progression from Paleo-Hebrew into all of these other languages,
And interestingly, when people are said to be speaking incoherently, they're said to be babbling, just babbling away. And that must come from Babel as well, right? It can't be a coincidence.
No coincidence. And it just so happens that when babies babble, they're actually speaking Paleo-Hebrew, it turns out, because Paleo-Hebrew is a language that doesn't have any vowels. So there's only one vowel sound, and it's an sound that's that comes with every consonant. So it sounds like ba, ga, la, ra, pa. Yeah. So what does that sound like?
Sounds like abracadabra.
Well, that too, but because that is a Paleo-Hebrew word. But that's baby talk.
Yeah, I think, was it you that showed a series of videos of babies all over the world? And when they've got a particular need, like their nappy is wet, or they're hungry, or they're tired, they all emit the same sounds before they've learnt to speak a language. It's like instinctively instilled within them.
Yes, exactly. And there was an experiment done by a 15th century king in Scotland. What he did was he marooned a deaf and dumb woman on an island with 2 newborn babies, and provided for them, but left them in isolation. And he came back 15, 20 years later to see if these 2 boys who were brought up in silence could actually speak a language. And it said that these 2 boys could speak perfect Hebrew.
Wow.
So that tells me that there definitely is something going on.
That's a pretty extreme experiment.
Yes, it is, but I think it was worthwhile for the results, to be honest. But when you actually look at language, there have been so many cases of people receiving a blow on the head and waking up speaking a completely different language, a language they've never spoken before. It tells you that within all of us is every single language. We have access somehow to every single language, because it's not just one isolated case of that happening. There's lots and lots and lots of cases. And it's not that somebody has a stroke and wakes up and they're speaking a bit of Welsh and a bit of Mandarin Chinese and a bit of gibberish. No, they're speaking a complete language, in its entirety, just suddenly appeared in their heads. Sometimes they no longer have their original language left. Some Australian guy woke up speaking Mandarin Chinese so fluently that he ended up hosting a game show in China.
Wow.
So the implication is that we have access to every single language there is, and it doesn't work the way we think it does. We think we have to learn these languages for years and years and years until we get fluent. That's a long way round, but we have access to them all. But we can only express that if there's some kind of accident or some wires get crossed in our brains.
Yeah, it's like you download it.
Yeah,
download the software.
But it's not so much downloading. It's saying that we have access to all of it at all times, but we choose to only sort of hold on to one or two of them.
Well, English seems to be a totally insane language. It must be an absolute bastard for foreigners to try and get their heads around English, because there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just completely arbitrary. You can look at words like tough, cough, bow, through, though, and thorough. They're all spelt the same way at the core, but they're all pronounced differently. And it's almost as if this language was deliberately designed to take the piss out of those using it and just make it as difficult as possible. And it's just a hotchpotch of different influences. You can detect some French in there, some German, some Latin, but it's just a mess overall. And it seems to me that it was no accident that this was chosen to be the de facto worldwide language, and it got spread all over the world by the expansion of the British Empire. So you have all these different corners of the earth speaking English now, and it's the main international business language. It seems it was always meant to be that case, because it's an insane language to speak, and there's all kinds of word magic going on beneath the surface as well.
Exactly. And yes, it was intentionally designed, right? And it was designed in exactly the same time that I was explaining before. The Renaissance period. I think the actual date that's attributed to it was 1500, but it was designed at the same time as the globe lie was created. All these things, these deceptions were implemented, at this one time in history.
It's the era of Shakespeare as well, wasn't it?
Yes, 1500s. This is but English was a manufactured language. If you go into the Saxons. The Saxons, lived in England, or what was called Britain or Britannia at the time. There were, the word Saxon actually comes from sons of Isaac, Isaacsons, Isaacsons, Saxons. Wow. But there were two sons of Isaac, so you got the Saxons, sons of Isaac, and the Anglo-Saxons, the angelic sons of Isaac. Yeah, so the angelic ones, well, it wasn't angelic in a good way. It was the fallen angels again.
That's where you get England from, right? Angle land or angel land.
Angel land. So English is the language of the fallen angels. Now, it was manufactured. Now, you were saying how difficult it was for people to actually sort of grasp how this language works when you got all these words like bow and cough and though and whatever. Well, the confusion is that you're looking at it from the stance of what's efficient for a language, right? But this language isn't created as a means of communication. It was created as a means to create thought, usually dissonant thought or incorrect, lies or deception. Yeah, it's a means of creating thought, and in that way, those words or the differences or the similarities in those words make sense. Okay, if you look at it from a different perspective. As a language of a means of communication, it doesn't make sense. That's because it wasn't designed as a means of communication. Yeah, it was designed to create thought. Okay. And I think I've got Noam Chomsky, who's a linguist, who actually says the same thing, that it's as a means of communication, it's obviously not designed for that. It's designed for something else. And it's only being used as a means of communication.
And just that brief reference I made there to the word abracadabra, that literally means, as I speak, I create. Yes. And this is conveying the idea that words or sound frequencies and vibrations are very powerful, and you can manifest certain desired situations by speaking them into being, effectively. But if you've got a language like English, where the odds are stacked against you and words don't mean what you think they do, you could be manifesting something that is very different to what was on your mind. Indeed.
And I said about Paleo-Hebrew being the original language, the language of creation. Well, it reads right to left, while English reads left to right. So when we say something in English, we actually say it backwards. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Everything backwards. That's the adversary's way of working. So when you're using this language of creation, well, you're speaking in English, so you're using that language of creation backwards. And also,
sorry, I'm missing the point here. Just clarify how it's backwards. I'm just trying to get my head around that still.
Right. Well, you read this language in Paleo-Hebrew. You read it right to left. Okay. So when we read left to right, we're saying things backwards, because obviously Paleo-Hebrew came first. So what we call backwards, right to left, is actually forwards. English is backwards.
Right.
So we're saying when we say things, we're actually saying them backwards from a Paleo-Hebrew point of view.
Okay.
And Paleo-Hebrew being the language of creation, so we're saying the words of the language of creation backwards.
And then you've got the likes of Aleister Crowley and occultists who reverse words and phrases. This is part of the satanic ideology, but they take English words and phrases, and part of Aleister Crowley's doctrine was to teach his adepts how to read backwards and speak backwards, and they sing hymns backwards apparently at satanic masses. So in that case, they're putting it back the right way round again.
to try and use the magic, not the actual magic, but use the power of the language of creation.
Not your average discussion subjects around the water cooler at work, all these, are they?
No. Well, I've not been able to talk to anybody about any of these subjects for the last 15 years.
Yeah. Well, that's why we do shows like this, man.
Yes.
Yeah. The other thing is, as I've alluded to, a lot of words in English don't mean what we think they do. And one which somebody put me onto was the word nice. And we think it means pleasant and agreeable, but when you get into what it actually means, according to this world history definition I've got here, it used to mean foolish or stupid, and it came through early French from the Latin nacius, meaning ignorant of truth. And it says by the 18th century, the sense of being very particular or finicky had developed. In the 19th century, nice came to mean pleasant or agreeable, and then respectable, a sense quite unlike its original meaning. So when we say something is nice, we're saying it's ignorant without even knowing we're doing it.
But that process you just said is a process of reversing the meaning, so that now in this day and age, there's a whole panoply of words that we think mean one thing, but the actual energy behind that word means something, usually means the opposite, Even the word to know, to know something has the word know in it. Just, can you see what I'm saying?
It's and believe has the word lie in it.
It has the word lie in it. We see these things and we don't realize. I get the feeling that when we find the whole truth, it will be so obvious, just like looking at the word believe and seeing the lie in the middle of it. Yeah, it'd be so obvious that we almost can't see it. Yeah.
Is it not down to the will and the intent of the person using the word, though? Like if you say something is nice and in your heart you mean it's pleasant and agreeable, it doesn't matter if the word carries the energy of saying it's ignorant, because your intent was, that it's pleasant. Yeah, well,
in this case, your intent doesn't really cut it. It's what again, it's what you do. if you're, I'm trying to think of an analogy, a good analogy, but you could have the greatest of intent, but actually do real evil in the world, but with a smile on your face, because you think you're doing the
right.
I'm trying.
So if you're a 5G engineer and your boss has told you that this is going to save humanity because we're going to be able to communicate so much better and all this, and you think, oh well, I'm putting some good into the world, but in actual fact you're bathing everyone in radiation and frying them as they sleep in their beds at night.
Exactly.
You think you're doing good, but in actual fact you're putting harm into the world.
Exactly. It's not what you think, it's what you do in this world. And that's the difference between the Old and New Testament. The Old Testament is about doing, action, doing or not doing. Yeah, the New Testament is about thinking and believing. It's two different ideologies. One's the original Hebrew ideology, thinking in pictures, and concrete imagery, rather than these abstract symbolic words that are all processed in your head, and it's two different things, and one of them is about creation. Yeah, the concrete side is about creation, and the other one is about deception. So yes, it is. You can have the greatest of intent, like your 5G engineer. Yeah, he could be told stories about how 5G is going to help doctors, be able to cure people of cancer, and he will feel great about it, and he will whistle as he puts the towers up. But you're right. It doesn't matter what he feels or what his intent is. The damage is going to get done.
Isn't it ironic that we're talking about the bastardization of the language and how it controls us and stuff, and we're doing this interview in English?
Right, but
I love it.
Can you see how difficult it's been sometimes getting a concept across? I was talking to somebody called Roxanne the other day, and she was wrestling with it as well, because we were talking about some deep topics, and every now and again she'd want to say something and she just didn't have the words.
Yeah, that happens.
And what I was saying in that talk, that the Inuit have 50 words for snow, because snow to them is the most important thing in their world. They have to know exactly what snow's around. So some snow might hide crevasses, and so on and so on. So they need that nuance to be able to describe all the types of snow that they might encounter. But in English, we have one word for snow, and that's because it's not important to us. Okay. But in English, there are something like 250 words for deception. So now we can see what is important in this language. Yeah.
There's probably 20 or 30 words for cannabis. There's probably 20 or 30 words for the sex act. There's probably 20 or 30 words for the genitalia.
Oh, well, when you come down to people, that's true, because we make up slang words because there aren't the words in the actual official language to cover all the nuances. And you find that people from different cultures, say, somebody who's Italian who learns English, even if they're fluent in English, there'll be times when they'll talk and all of a sudden they'll burst into some Italian because they literally can't express something in English. There aren't the words in English to express everything. And that's intentional, because if you think in words and your vocabulary is limited, then there are things you can't even think about.
Yeah,
you're literally beyond your capacity to think about, because you don't have the words in which to use to think.
I wonder if these elites at their secret society gatherings, when they get together in these eyes wide shut style mansions and have their little shindigs and get-togethers, I wonder if they communicate in languages other than English, so that they can communicate properly amongst themselves and convey meaning, and they're not enslaving themselves with the same language that has been foisted on the rest of us. I have to wonder about that.
I personally don't think they need to, really. Even this language is good enough for what they have to do with it. I think because they still sacrifice to their Canaanite gods. So maybe they actually use the original language to do that in, because not many of us actually get to know what goes on in Bohemian Grove and all the Eyes Wide Shut parties.
No, I think I'd rather be somewhere else on that.
Yeah,
occasion.
Me too.
Yeah. All right then. Well, I think we're pretty much done, mate. But before we go, what would you like people to take away from this conversation? What would be your parting message? Have you got any sort of words of inspiration, or just anything you'd like to leave people with that have absorbed all this information now?
The thing about my talks is, at the beginning I said that I haven't got any answers for anyone, because there's something about this topic that I'm not quite getting. There's it's on the tip of my tongue, and maybe something will trigger it, and I'll understand more the thing that ties it all together. But at this point, I don't have any answers for everyone. What to do about this. But the only thing I would suggest to people is be careful of the words you use, especially to yourself, because that power of creation. You use that power of creation on yourself all the time. Yeah, the words you use actually affect your body and your mind, and you really have to be sort of wary about what words you use. I
am trying to entrain myself not to use the word understand anymore, as in you stand under. You subjugate yourself to something. I try and use the word comprehend instead of understand now. That's just one small
Right.
gesture.
Well, there's one word in there that you use that's going to stop you from doing that. Did you notice what word you used that was actually going to prevent you from doing what you said you wanted to do?
No, but I know you're going to tell me.
The word try. Don't use the word try. You do
Okay, you express your intent and you say, I am going to do this.
Yes. Well, as Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try. I can't do the voice anymore.
Okay.
But that's the point. Try is you telling yourself that you're putting it off. Whatever it is, you're going to put it off. And you'll just
you
intentionally push it off. I'm trying. I'm attempting to get there. All right, so okay, you're going to continue to attempt to get there. You're never going to get there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, got you.
So just try. See, it's difficult. Banish that
see how
word.
difficult it is.
Yeah, banish that word from your vocabulary and do or don't do.
But you can entrain yourself, I mean, every time I hear the word understand now, my ears sort of prick up and I'm like, oh, there's that word again. So the more you entrain yourself to recognize these things over time, you can achieve it.
True. I'm still struggling with, because I'm helping people with their illnesses, I sometimes slip into using the word cure. And, when you look into the word cure, the original meaning was to preserve, just like cure meat.
Yeah.
So yes, when you say you want to cure something, you're saying you want to preserve it.
Cure a disease is to preserve it, yeah.
Yes, and people who say that they're suffering with something, well, the word suffer means to permit, to allow, to consent. Yeah, in the Bible it says, "Never suffer a witch to live." That means don't permit a witch to live. So the original intent is to allow. So when you say I'm suffering with cancer, you're saying I'm allowing cancer.
There you go.
So yes,
devilishly ingenious.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, do you want to point people to any of your work online, or is there any of your output you just want to promote at this point?
Right. Well, I've got a website called allegedlydave.com. My YouTube channel is dmurphy25, and right now, here's a bit of a plug. I'm in the middle of a wheel appeal. So I'm trying to get hold of an electric unicycle. So anybody wants to donate to the wheel appeal, just go to my website, and I think you'll find it on the appeal on the front page.
So you're going to be at the Flat Earth Convention in Amsterdam at the end of September. Are you doing the UK one in Kidderminster as well?
Yes, I am. Yes,
okay.
I am.
That's the Global Eye. That's the 14th and 15th, I think, of September. And then the Amsterdam is 2 weeks after that. So you're speaking at both of those.
Yep, and I'm also going to do a big chunk of the Global Eye European tour as well.
All right, well, I look forward to linking with you at both of those then. I'm going to be present at both of those.
Oh,
and
cool.
Thanks for coming on today, man. It's been an incredible chat.
You're welcome. I'm sorry if I've diverged into different topics while I've been talking about things. So I'm sorry.
Not the easiest topics to cover, these.
No, and I get sidetracked on things quite easily as well.
Yeah, well, no worries. Thanks for coming on today.
Okay, you're welcome.
This is just for fun. Vibrations, I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up good vibrations. I'm picking up